working out what it meant to be a loyal opposition. So under goading from Hamilton, Adams actually signed the Alien and Sedition Acts, which made it flat out illegal to criticize the government in a number of ways, and this was considered a serious attack on the Bill of Rights. The American people threw Adams out in the next election, and Adams actually, he never really forgave Hamilton for pushing him in that direction. So the American people threw Adams out in the next election. The Democratic Republicans under Jefferson were put into power, and this was a peaceful transition of power. Adams stormed and stomped his feet and ran out of the White House before Jefferson even showed up. He did not even want to talk to him, but he left the White House peacefully. And that was the beginning of the concept that you could transfer power peacefully without a revolution in the United States. So, did you guys have any other general questions or thoughts? Yes?
Under which president was the Homestead Act?
The Homestead Act was Lincoln. The Homestead Act was actually designed to fill the American West with good, free American farmers. So they actually opened up these big areas saying each farmer could go in, carve out a piece of land, 160 acres, and put his homestead down there. It had several weaknesses in it, to which a lot of these farmers would be bought out by banks and corporations later on. But that was when the Homestead Act originated. Yes?
I think one idea was if everybody owned a piece of America,
yes,
then they'd have a vested interest in the outcome, and so they'd be more active politically.
Yes, and definitely that was a very Jeffersonian idea. In that respect, Lincoln had a little bit of Jefferson in him, even though Lincoln is going to be loyal to the descendants of the Federalist Party. Yes.
Thomas Paine, he was another very controversial guy.
Thomas Paine was, if you guys recall, the revolutionary who wrote Common Sense, the book that almost single-handedly fired up average Americans to join the revolution. Thomas Paine actually, he was considered to be a political outsider all throughout his life. For example, he trashed the Constitution. He was very firmly like a Democratic Republican who believed in, like you might call him a modern-day libertarian or something along those lines. But Thomas Paine, he never, none of the Founding Fathers ever completely embraced him because he was considered to be out there in his time period. Yeah, but yeah, so did you guys... yeah, the famous talking filibuster yesterday, which, but yeah, I can't really get on that yet. But any other questions or thoughts? Okay, I like you guys. You're a very active crowd. Yes?
But until President Jackson, until Jackson, it really was not a very inclusive democracy.
No, and actually...
And so even though they may have differed, they really were both elitists.
Well, the Federalists were openly elitists, I would call them. The Federalists very much believed the educated elite have the best idea of how to run America. The Democratic Republicans slowly loosened voting restrictions in their time in power, but you're absolutely right in the sense that it was not until 20 years later or so in the age of Jackson when they finally declared that all white men in the country could vote regardless of education, landholding, etc., etc. Yeah.
So it was Jackson who got rid of the requirement that you had to own property?
Here, why don't I continue this diagram a little bit? Let's see. So you have the Federalists facing the Democratic Republicans. And this is the way it is for about 10 years or so. And then the Federalists make a big mistake in the War of 1812. What do you guys know about the War of 1812? You ever heard of this? Yeah. When did it start? Well, hey, I have had students tell me before that the Vietnam War was fought between North and South Korea. So I keep on waiting for someone to tell me the War of 1812 started in 1957. So, yeah, anyways, in the War of 1812,
That's scary.
yeah. I know. In the War of 1812, you have this war with Britain. It was part of the larger context of what was going on in the wars against Napoleon. But the Federalists made the mistake of opposing a politically popular war. Because of this, and there was a general perception that we had won the war, the Federalists were considered traitors, and they virtually phased out of existence for about 10 years or so. This was called the era of good feelings. Because there was only one political party for a 10-year period, it was the Democratic Republicans. Everyone was supposed to be getting along, everything was great. Then came along, who said it, Andrew Jackson. Yes? Andrew Jackson was and actually, you'll recognize Andrew Jackson, though I don't have a picture of him here. He's that guy right there. Andrew Jackson was a political leader who was so controversial, he single-handedly reignited the two-party system. So, yes, and you know, like, it's funny, I can tell you so many stories about these guys. Needless to say, Andrew Jackson, big president of the common man, you know, he greatly expanded presidential power. He was the first president to ever veto stuff because he disagreed with it, not because he simply thought it was unconstitutional. There were all of these things that people loved about this rough and tumble frontier president, Andrew Jackson. At the same time, he also loved slavery and he hated Indians, and so for that reason, he was, to modern eyes, he's a very problematic president. But Andrew Jackson, especially with his use of the presidential veto, the remnants of the Federalists united in opposition against him. So then these guys split apart. The Democratic Republicans became the Democrats. The Federalists became the Whig Party. And this was the way things were for a long time. The Whigs, they were what I would call a WASP party. Yes. Does anyone know what those acronyms stand for? Yes. White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. The Whig Party, they very much believed that Christian evangelical morality should become prominent in American culture. They were actually more centered in the North because, like the old Federalists, they were close to banks and corporations. The Democrats, they were far more open to immigrants. The Whigs tended to be a lot more anti-immigrant. What were the main immigrant groups at this point? The Irish, yes, the Irish, the Italians, the Russians. So the Democratic Party was more open to these groups, whereas the Whig Party was more closed off to these, you know, because they saw this as an evil Catholic influence and such. But in any case, though, here's where things get funny. The Democrats called themselves the white man's party. They were the official party of white supremacy. They were centered in the South. Does anyone see the irony of this? Who is president today? A Democrat who also happens to be an African American. And if you want the full story of how all this changed, you'd have to take my classes. But in any case, though, these guys were the two-party system until one issue came along, so big, so controversial, it totally ripped these guys apart. What was that? Actually, it was not so much states' rights as to what is going to be the future of American slavery. And that was such a big, controversial question that any Southern Whigs defected to the Democrats, and what was left of the Whigs in the North became the Republican Party. They elected a president in 1860 who flat out said he did not believe in slavery. That so offended the white South that they seceded from the Union. Who was that first ever Republican president? Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, presides over the end of slavery. The Democrats, many of them stayed loyal to the South. You get the Civil War. So, this is where you get the roots of our two-party system in the way it's been formed today. Needless to say, there's been a lot of changes. For example, the Democrats, far from being the white man's party, actually are largely considered to be the party more friendly to racial diversity today. The Republicans, in many ways, they have made inroads with constituencies like evangelicals and Southerners who always used to be with the Democrats. But in any case, though, this is where you get the two-party system. It started all the way back with the Federalists against the Anti-Federalists. It evolved all the way into that. So, that's the Cliff's Notes version, and once again, I could spend 4 classes on this. But, did you guys have any general thoughts about this diagram? What kind of happened here? Or, no? But was that enlightening at all for you? Good. I'm glad that I'm teaching you some things that you were not aware of. Now,
Where'd the
Yes.
Blues party come from?
the bull moose, and this is one of those, I could draw a million side diagrams here. There was a big battle in the Republican Party in the early 1900s as to whether they would ally with the progressive movement or as to whether they would stay this conservative party. And Teddy Roosevelt bolted up, he created this liberal Republican party called the Bull Moose Party, which wanted to ally with the progressive movement. He fought against William Taft, who wanted to stay conservative Republican. He did a lot better than Taft in that election, but eventually that all kind of dies out when Teddy Roosevelt dies out, and the Republican Party decided to remain a more conservative party. Yes. But yeah, did you guys have any other questions or thoughts about that? Yes.
Lincoln was technically, they say Republican, but at the time wasn't his party the Union Party?
Yes.
And they didn't make him, they kind of made him Republican possibly.
Oh, well actually,
And Grant was like the first Republican.
that's a great question. Lincoln ran as the Republican candidate. The Republican Party had been founded in Wisconsin in 1855, and Lincoln was one of the first major leaders. Then in the Civil War, they said, and it was kind of like like a watering over the political divisions. But they said there is no Republican or Democratic Party. You're either a Unionist or you're not a Unionist. So that is when the Republicans and a couple Democrats united into the Unionist Party. And then after the Civil War was over, they went back to the old Republican-Democrat dichotomy. Yeah. Yeah. So did you guys have any more questions up to this point? Yeah.
When did the term yellow dog Democrat?
Yellow dog Democrat. Oh, that is a great question. Actually, I know a lot about the blue dog Democrats. What is the yellow dog Democrat in particular refer to?
Yeah,
I think they were Southern Democrats.
Oh, yes. The
Dixiecrats.
Yes, so the Yellow Dog Democrats, the Dixiecrats. There was a Southern conservative wing of the Democratic Party which dominated the party for most of the 1800s. They remained very strong in the Democratic Party, heading all the way into the 1940s, 1950s, when the Democrats faced a lot of internal turmoil over what we're going to do on civil rights. And then eventually, a lot of the Democratic Party defected to the Republicans after the chaos of the 1960s. But there were some conservative Democrats who remained loyal to the Democrats until the 80s, 90s. Those were the Yellow Dog Democrats. Most of those guys have since switched to the Republican Party. There are a couple of them left though. Yeah. Yeah, so did you guys have any other questions or thoughts up to this point? Yes?
Well, with the Emancipation Proclamation,
Yes.
wasn't part of that he had to politically not free all the slaves, but he had to hold Democrats in the border states?
Well, I could talk a half hour about the Emancipation Proclamation, but it was a combination of pure political calculation. Let's get more people on our side. Let's rally the international community with us. Partly pure what can I get done at this point? I have to keep the border states loyal. I have to not free those slaves because I need them. And then the moral aspect to it as well, because Lincoln decided to finally strike that blow against slavery. So he liberated a good portion of the slaves in the country. At least he promised he would with that proclamation. So that the Emancipation Proclamation was a combination of all of those different elements. Yeah. Yeah, so did you guys have any other questions up to this point? You guys are liking this, I can tell. Now, let's get to, I'll make this my last topic, and I picked this one because it's been in the headlines like crazy the last 3 months. That famous Second Amendment. And, yes, the Second Amendment. People ask me, all the time I get asked in my class, did the Founding Fathers believe that everyone in America should own a gun for self-defense, or were they actually gun control advocates? Once again, you are putting a 21st century world onto an 18th century world. I'm sure some of you know the specific wording of the Second Amendment. What does it say?
The right and the populace to have and bear arms shall
Yes.
not be abridged.
Yes, and the right of the population to have and bear arms shall not be abridged, but there's a first part to that amendment as well. What was that part of
In
it?
order to maintain a well.
In order to maintain a well-regulated militia. Let me take you back to the world of the Founding Fathers and guns in the 18th century. In many ways, both the pro-gun control people and the pro-gun rights people totally misinterpret aspects of that world in the 18th century. For example, what many of the for example, NRA members would say is that the well-regulated militia part of the Second Amendment was not the important part of it. The important part was, the right of the people to own and bear arms. So basically, they downplayed the whole first part of the amendment. What the pro-gun control people say is the Second Amendment is out of date. It's, it was made in a different world. We should not have to follow it anymore. Well, once again, completely missing the point here. Let's go back into the world of the 18th century here. The way that this worked, back in the 18th century, they had this conception that everyone should have the right to bear arms, and the main purpose of everyone bearing arms is so that they could use them either in the service of the state or the federal government, or for their local communities, depending on which ones they were loyal to, in a sense. So there was a very civic duty concept to the Second Amendment. So, like for example, let's say that you're in the town of, I don't know, like Concord, Concord, New Hampshire, or something like that. The way that a militia would work is everyone in the town owns a gun. There would be a town official who would come around and inspect your firearms, make sure they were within requirements, make sure that they were okay, and then at the call of a beacon, everyone would grab their guns and line up for militia drills in order to defend the town of Concord. So in a way, there's aspects of this that are a complete nightmare to both of those sides today. You have a government official going around inspecting every single one of your guns and registering them. You also have every single person owning a gun for the purpose of defense of the community. So it was a very different, because the main reason why they wrote the Second Amendment, and here's where things also get complicated. Many of the Founding Fathers had the fear of a national standing army, because that was what Britain had used against us in the Revolution. So the idea was that instead the citizens will, they will defend themselves as much as possible, and you will have basically by doing this, you will not need a large national standing army. Now today, of course, we take the concept of a large national standing army for granted. We view it as essential to national defense, and now you have, of course, these explosive debates as to what exactly should be happening with America's gun owners and gun supply and everything like that. Now, so thinking about that, did you guys have any thoughts about the way